She sang alone at the station until a stranger picked up a guitar. She sat alone on a hard wooden bench at the station, her bag tucked close to her side, her voice trembling on the edge of something she wasn't sure she had the courage to do. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a pale glow on the empty platforms, and the only sound for a while was the occasional announcement echoing through the speakers. Trains came and went. People passed by. But she stayed still, her fingers tracing the edge of a small notebook, the one where she kept her songs. Her heart beat faster as she opened it. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe if you love meaningful stories, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I really enjoy seeing where these stories travel. For weeks, she had promised herself she would try. Just once. Just sing in public, even if no one listened. She told herself it didn't matter if people stopped or if they ignored her. What mattered was proving to herself that she could. But now, with the reality pressing down on her, it felt heavier than she expected. Her throat was dry. Her palms were sweaty. She thought of closing the notebook and leaving, but the silence around her was louder than any song, and so she lifted her head, cleared her throat, and let the first line escape. The sound was thin at first, almost fragile. It didn't seem to belong in the station, where footsteps echoed and vending machines clicked. Her voice wavered, carried away by the large open space. She thought for sure no one would even notice. But a man in a dark coat looked up from his phone, and a woman waiting with a suitcase turned her head. Her heart pounded harder. She told herself not to look at them. She kept her eyes fixed on the notebook in her lap. She remembered the first time she ever sang in front of anyone. It was years ago, in her grandmother's living room. The curtains drawn, the smell of soup filling the house. Her grandmother had clapped after every song, no matter how off-key. "You have a gift," she had said. It was her grandmother's voice echoing in her memory now, steadying her nerves as she sang through the second line. But then doubt crept in. What if people laughed? What if her voice cracked? She pressed her foot against the floor to ground herself. The words flowed, though softer than she wanted them to be. She wished she could sound braver. She wished she could sing as if she belonged here, as if this was her stage. A little boy tugged at his mother's sleeve and pointed at her. His wide eyes made her stomach twist. Was he curious or amused? The mother smiled faintly and nodded for him to stay quiet. It was the smallest sign of kindness, but it pushed her to keep going. She raised her voice just a little, letting it stretch out past the bench and into the space around her. Some people shifted uncomfortably, clearly wishing for quiet. Others looked up briefly and returned to their screens. A few listened, and that was enough. She felt the air in her lungs expand with a touch more confidence. She let herself lean into the melody, even as her hands trembled. Still, fear lingered in every note. She could hear the tremor in her voice. She could feel her own hesitation pressing down. It wasn't perfect. She knew that. But it was real. And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't hiding behind closed doors or whispered songs into her pillow. She was here, in front of strangers, singing out loud. A whistle from a distant track pierced the air, but she didn't stop. She pushed through the verse, and when she reached the chorus, something shifted inside her. She was no longer just a girl at a station trying not to fall apart. She was a singer, even if only for a few fleeting minutes, daring herself to be heard. Her voice filled the space again. Not strong, not flawless, but steady enough to draw another glance from someone who had been pretending not to listen. That was all she needed to keep going. And so she sang on, unaware that something, or someone, was about to change everything. Her voice drifted through the station, fragile but real, and for the first time she let it carry just a little farther than she had before. The notes hung in the air above the shuffle of footsteps and the metallic click of a ticket machine. It was strange, almost out of place, but not unpleasant. People shifted in their seats, looked up briefly, then back down again. Some were curious, some looked mildly annoyed, but no one told her to stop. That in itself felt like a small victory. She noticed the smallest details now, because focusing on them kept her fear at bay. The way a woman tightened her scarf as she listened, the way a man in a business suit tapped his foot just slightly in rhythm before catching himself and looking away. She caught the reflection of her own face in the darkened glass of the waiting area. Wide eyes, tense mouth, but she was still singing. She hadn't run. She hadn't let the silence win. The song took shape in the open space. It wasn't loud. It didn't have to be. It was something softer, something that worked its way into the atmosphere rather than forcing itself onto it. Every lyric was a small step forward, proof that she was braver than she had been the day before. She thought about the countless times she had sung these same words in her bedroom, whispering them so her neighbors wouldn't hear. Now, here she was, exposed in front of strangers. It felt terrifying, but also strangely right. Her notebook rested loosely in her lap, though she barely looked at it now. The words were already in her heart. Her hands still trembled, but her voice held steady, even when it cracked. A boy clapped once, a single sharp sound that made his mother hush him with a smile. That small burst of encouragement made her chest ache in a way she hadn't expected. She wanted to give more, even if her voice betrayed her nerves. Not everyone cared. One man sighed loudly, put on his headphones, and turned away. But she realized something important in that moment. It wasn't about everyone. It never had been. Even if just one person listened, even if just one heart caught her melody and carried it for a while, it would mean she had done what she came here to do. The speakers overhead crackled with an announcement about a delayed train, and for a second her voice was drowned out. She almost stopped, but then she remembered the promise she made herself. No more stopping, no more hiding. She waited for the noise to fade, then picked the song back up exactly where she left off. Her throat was tight, but she didn't let that stop her. There was a shift she couldn't quite name. A man standing at the far end of the waiting area had turned his head. He wasn't pretending not to listen. He was watching her. His eyes followed her movements, not with judgment, but with curiosity. She felt her face grow warm, but she didn't look away. Instead, she let herself lean a little more into the next chorus. Her voice wavered but grew louder, gaining just enough strength to reach him. And then, the unexpected happened. She noticed something she hadn't seen before. The man had a guitar case slung over his shoulder. He hadn't moved to open it, but the sight of it made her chest tighten with possibility. She didn't know him. She didn't know why he was here, or if he would even care enough to act. But suddenly, the idea that her song might not remain hers alone began to spark in her mind. She carried the last note of the verse into the wide space, letting it hang longer than she had practiced. The station, usually indifferent to anything human, seemed to listen. And somewhere inside her, a small voice whispered that this moment was not meant to stay small. Something, or someone, was about to meet her in the music. Her voice carried through the waiting area, uneven but determined, and for the first time she noticed how people reacted when they thought she wasn't looking. An older woman with silver hair leaned against her suitcase, her lips curved into the faintest smile as she watched. Two teenagers whispered to each other, laughing under their breath, but neither of them moved away. A man scrolling on his phone shifted uncomfortably, glancing up every so often as if he couldn't decide whether to be irritated or intrigued. The girl kept her eyes on her notebook, but her ears caught everything. The coughs, the shuffling of feet, the way voices dipped lower as passengers tried not to disturb the song. She wasn't used to being noticed, and every small reaction felt sharper than it should. For a moment she thought of stopping, folding her notebook shut, and disappearing into the crowd. But the applause she imagined from her grandmother's living room echoed in her head, urging her to go on. Her hands trembled on her lap. She clutched the pages as if they might anchor her to the bench. The station was never meant to be a stage, but here she was, making it one. A melody against the harshness of fluorescent lights and cold tiled floors. A voice rising over the endless clatter of luggage wheels. It wasn't much, but it was something. The woman with the silver hair moved closer. She didn't say anything, didn't want to interrupt, but her presence was steady, kind. The girl felt her shoulders loosen just a little as she sang the next line. The lyrics came out stronger, less hesitant. A flicker of confidence sparked. Maybe she could really finish this song. Then, a mistake. Just a single missed note, but it rang louder than all the others to her own ears. She froze, her voice faltering for a beat, and panic surged in her chest. Her eyes darted to the notebook, as if the words she already knew by heart might somehow rescue her. A man near the ticket machine raised his eyebrows, and the two teenagers snickered again. Shame clawed at her throat. She almost stopped. She almost let the silence crash down and swallow the fragile courage she had built. But then the woman near her suitcase gave a tiny nod, as if to say, "Keep going. Don't give up now." The girl inhaled, shaky but determined, and pushed through the mistake. Her voice cracked on the next lyric, but she didn't care anymore. She wasn't singing for perfection. She was singing because she had promised herself she would, and maybe that was enough. The sound filled the station again, small but growing. Her fear began to blur into something else. Not confidence, not yet, but resolve. People would look, people would judge, but at least they were hearing her. For someone who had hidden her voice for so long, that meant more than she could explain. She finished the verse with her gaze fixed on the ground, refusing to see if anyone had walked away. Her heart pounded so hard it drowned out the rumble of an arriving train. When the chorus came, she took a risk. She lifted her head and let her voice reach just a little higher, just a little clearer. That was when she noticed the man with the guitar case again. He hadn't sat down. He was standing still, watching her with quiet focus. His hand rested on the handle of the case as though he might open it. She tried to ignore the thought, but it wouldn't leave her. Could it be possible he was listening for more than curiosity? Could it be that her shaky song had actually reached someone who understood? She swallowed hard, finishing the chorus. For now, there was no answer. But something about the way he stood, unhurried, attentive, made her wonder if she wasn't quite as alone as she thought. Her voice wavered on the higher note, just slightly out of tune, and the mistake hit her like a wave of ice. The sound seemed to echo louder in her own ears than in anyone else's. For a split second she stopped breathing. Her throat tightened, her chest burned with embarrassment, and the urge to snap her notebook shut and flee nearly overwhelmed her. She could feel eyes on her, or at least she imagined them. The two teenagers who had been whispering earlier covered their mouths, and though she couldn't hear their words, she felt certain they were laughing at her. A man near the vending machine glanced up with a smirk before turning back to his snack. It was enough to make her want to vanish into the tiles beneath her feet. Her grandmother's voice returned, steady and calm in memory. Don't stop because of one mistake. Songs aren't meant to be perfect. They're meant to be felt. But in this moment, the reassurance didn't feel strong enough. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. The silence that followed the wrong note seemed heavier than the noise of the trains rushing past the platforms. Her pulse pounded in her ears. "This is it," she thought. "This is where I stop. This is where I prove I was foolish to even try." Her fingers curled tightly around the notebook. She could close it right now and walk away, and no one would remember her name or her face. She would just be another girl passing through, forgotten in the blur of a busy station. But then, something unexpected happened. The older woman with the silver hair, the one who had smiled earlier, shifted closer and gave a tiny nod. It was almost nothing, a stranger's small gesture, but it cut through the panic like a lifeline. The girl inhaled, shaky and uneven, and forced herself to sing the next line. Her voice cracked. It trembled. But it was there. And that was enough. Each lyric after that felt like climbing uphill with shaking legs. She could hear the imperfection in her pitch. She knew she wasn't giving a performance anyone would pay for, but she also knew this moment wasn't about perfection. It was about proving she wouldn't let fear silence her again. A child near the benches clapped once, startling his mother, who hushed him quickly. The boy looked disappointed but kept his eyes on the girl. That single clap, innocent and unfiltered, gave her just enough courage to keep pressing forward. The station noise swelled again, an incoming train, an announcement blaring from the speakers, but she pushed her voice louder, daring to be heard over it all. This wasn't a concert. It wasn't even a real performance. It was just a girl on a bench singing to prove she could. Yet in that fragile insistence, something inside her grew. By the time she reached the chorus again, her voice steadied. Not strong, not flawless, but firmer than before. She let the note stretch, refusing to cut it short. The teenagers had stopped whispering. The man by the vending machine had lowered his snack. People were paying attention again, not because she was perfect, but because she had refused to stop when it mattered most. And then she saw him again. The man with the guitar case. He was no longer standing casually in the background. His gaze was fixed directly on her, his expression unreadable but focused. His hand had shifted, resting firmly on the handle of his case, as if he were deciding something. She felt her stomach twist with nerves, not knowing if he would judge her too, or if he might do something else entirely. She finished the chorus with a shaky exhale, her chest rising and falling quickly. The silence afterward felt heavier than the song itself. But then the thought hit her. Maybe this wasn't silence at all. Maybe it was the moment right before something began. The girl's voice faded into the hollow air of the station, and for a moment, everything felt still. She kept her eyes down, too afraid to see what anyone thought of her. Her notebook lay open on her lap, but she wasn't looking at it anymore. She was only listening to the sound of her own heartbeat, thudding hard and uneven. Then she noticed the faintest sound, the scrape of a case being set on the floor. Her eyes flicked up, cautious, and there he was. The man she had seen watching her, now standing closer than before. His coat was worn, his hair slightly messy, and in his hand he carried a guitar case that had clearly seen years of use. He didn't say a word. He just looked at her with a kind of focus she wasn't used to. She felt her throat tighten, unsure if she should keep singing or stop completely. The case clicked open. Slowly, deliberately, as if the decision to do so had not been made lightly. He pulled out an old guitar, the wood polished but scratched from countless songs. He checked the strings with a quiet strum. The sound was warm and earthy, so different from the mechanical noises of the station. Heads turned. A few people who had been ready to board trains paused, curious. The girl froze. She had never shared her music with anyone before, not like this. Singing alone was terrifying enough, but having a stranger join her? She couldn't process what was happening. Was he mocking her? Was he trying to steal the attention she had barely gathered? Or was it something else entirely? He gave her the smallest nod, as if asking permission. She hesitated, her lips parting but no words coming out. Her instinct screamed at her to shut her notebook, to run, to leave before this turned into something she couldn't control. But the nod wasn't demanding, it wasn't pushy, it was patient. She realized he wasn't taking the moment from her, he was offering to share it. Her voice trembled as she started the verse again. This time, the guitar joined her, soft and careful at first, almost like he was trying to catch her rhythm without overwhelming it. The sound wrapped around her voice, filling the empty gaps she hadn't been able to cover alone. She blinked in surprise, nearly missing her next line. But then she found her footing again, guided by the steady strum of the strings. People noticed the difference immediately. The space felt alive in a way it hadn't before. The annoyed glances softened. Even the teenagers stopped whispering, their eyes fixed on the unexpected duet unfolding in front of them. The woman with silver hair leaned forward, smiling more fully now, as if she had been waiting for this. The girl's chest swelled with something she hadn't expected, relief. For the first time, her voice didn't feel fragile or small. It had something to rest on, something to lift it higher. She let the melody rise, stronger now, bolder. The man's guitar followed her, never too loud, never stealing the moment, only holding it steady. She had no idea who he was. A traveler, maybe, or someone who had played on countless corners and stations before. But none of that mattered. What mattered was that he had chosen to open his case, to step into her shaky song and give it the ground it needed. As the chorus came again, her voice cracked slightly, but she didn't care. For once, she wasn't alone in carrying it. She felt a rush of heat behind her eyes, the kind that comes when fear gives way to something greater. The station, a place usually filled with nothing but passing strangers, now held a moment that felt like it belonged to both of them. She didn't know how long it would last, maybe only until the next train. But for now, in the fading light of the platform, a girl's song and a stranger's guitar had begun to weave something no one had expected. Her voice stumbled for just a second when she realized what was happening. She had never rehearsed for this, never imagined that someone else might step into her fragile moment and turn it into something different. Yet there he was, sitting a few feet away with his guitar resting easily in his hands, his fingers strumming so naturally, it almost felt as if the song had always belonged to both of them. She hesitated, her eyes flicking down to her notebook as though the pages might tell her what to do. The lyrics blurred for a second. Her mouth went dry. This was supposed to be her song, her challenge, her test of courage. Now it felt like something new, something shared, and she wasn't sure she was ready for that. The man caught her glance. He didn't say anything. He just tilted his head slightly, his strumming soft, inviting. It was a question without words. "Do you want me here?" Her chest tightened. She could have shaken her head, closed the notebook, and ended it all right there. But instead she inhaled, lifted her chin, and sang the next line. Her voice was shaky at first, but the guitar filled in the space she couldn't. It caught her rhythm, steadied her timing, carried her through the nerves. For the first time that night, she wasn't thinking about mistakes. She wasn't thinking about the whispers or the smirks or the fear that had followed her for years. All she heard was the way her voice threaded with the sound of the strings, creating something bigger than either of them alone. The reaction around them was different too. People who had been scrolling through their phones now looked up, surprised. A boy clapped softly against his knees, too shy to make more noise, but unwilling to stop himself. The woman with silver hair beamed openly, her eyes bright. Even the two teenagers who had mocked her earlier now sat still, their expressions unreadable. The atmosphere of the station had shifted. Her voice grew stronger, almost without her realizing it. Each note carried a little more weight, a little more courage. She didn't have to hide behind quiet anymore. The guitar gave her permission to be louder, braver, fuller. The music wasn't perfect. Her pitch wavered. His strumming wasn't polished. But it was alive, and that was what mattered. She felt something she hadn't expected. Joy. Real, unguarded joy. It welled up in her chest, spilling out in the way her voice lifted higher than it had before. She caught herself smiling, almost laughing, between lines. For once, she wasn't just trying to survive her fear. She was enjoying the music itself. The man watched her carefully, adjusting his chords to match her changes, as though he could sense where she wanted to go before she even knew it herself. They didn't speak, didn't plan, didn't rehearse. But somehow they fit together, strangers making music as if they had been doing it for years. When the chorus came again, she didn't hold back. She let her voice ring out into the open air, not worried about who was listening or how they might judge. The guitar followed her, steady and sure, turning her fragile attempt into something whole. For the first time since she had sat on that wooden bench, she realized she wasn't carrying the song alone anymore. And maybe, just maybe, she never had to. She glanced at him one last time as the music filled the station. He didn't smile, didn't speak, but his expression said everything. Keep going. I've got you. And so she did. She sang with everything she had left, no longer just a girl trembling in the shadows, but someone daring to share her voice, because now it was no longer hers alone. The sound of the guitar blended with her voice until the two became something no one in the station could ignore. What had started as a shaky attempt to be brave was now growing into a moment that belonged to everyone there. The notes echoed off the tiled walls, softened by the hum of the fluorescent lights, and for the first time the station didn't feel cold or empty. It felt alive. She noticed the changes in the crowd before she even realized her own voice was stronger. The boy who had clapped earlier now swayed to the rhythm, his eyes wide with excitement. His mother, instead of hushing him, let out a small laugh and tapped her foot against the floor. The teenagers who had whispered before were leaning forward, caught up in the performance they hadn't expected. Even the businessman with his suitcase set it down beside him and stopped scrolling on his phone. The girl's fear was still there, fluttering in her chest, but it no longer controlled her. The music gave her something else to hold on to. Every strum of the guitar steadied her, gave her courage, and reminded her that she wasn't standing on this fragile ledge alone. The stranger wasn't trying to take her spotlight. He was building a bridge under her feet. Her voice soared through the chorus. She could feel the strength in it now, fuller than it had ever been in her bedroom or in the privacy of her notebook. She wasn't hiding anymore. She was sharing. And the look on the faces around her told her that people were listening, not out of politeness, not out of boredom, but because they wanted to. The atmosphere shifted. Conversations faded, footsteps slowed, and the usual impatience of waiting for a train seemed to disappear. The station, a place where no one ever paid attention to anyone else, now held a room full of people focused on the same thing. She felt tears sting her eyes, but this time they weren't from fear. They were from the strange, overwhelming realization that her voice could actually matter, that it could reach beyond her own chest and touch people she had never met. She had spent years believing no one would want to hear her sing, yet here they were, watching, listening, smiling. The man with the guitar glanced at her, as if to check if she wanted to take the next verse alone. She gave the smallest nod, and he softened his strumming, letting her voice rise without restraint. It was the scariest and most freeing moment all at once. She sang with her eyes closed, every word pouring out as if it had been waiting for this exact night to finally be heard. When she opened her eyes, she saw something she hadn't expected. A small crowd had gathered. Passengers who weren't even waiting at her platform had drifted closer, drawn by the sound. A young couple leaned against a pillar, holding hands. An older man had set down his newspaper. A child sitting cross-legged on the floor clapped in rhythm, completely unbothered by what anyone else thought. The girl's heart raced, but this time not with panic, with wonder. She had never thought her music could do this, never believed it could pull strangers together in such a simple, powerful way. She sang through the final lines of the verse, her voice no longer trembling. The man's guitar grew louder again, supporting her, lifting her, filling the space with warmth. Together, they turned the sterile air of the station into something that felt almost magical. As the song neared its end, she realized something that made her breath catch. She had come here tonight thinking she would be invisible, just a girl with a notebook singing into the noise. But she wasn't invisible. Not anymore. She was part of something bigger than herself, something that had changed the room in a way no one could have predicted. And she knew, whether this stranger stayed or left, whether anyone remembered her name tomorrow or not, this moment would stay with her forever. The song swelled through the station until it felt like even the walls were listening. She let the last line linger, her voice trailing off into silence. For a moment, no one moved. The world seemed to hold its breath, suspended in that space between the final note and whatever would follow. Her chest rose and fell quickly, her palms still damp with nerves. She wanted to look at the man with the guitar, to say something, but the words wouldn't come. It didn't matter. His quiet smile told her he understood. He strummed one final chord, letting it fade slowly, as if giving her voice room to rest. Then the sound of hands broke through. First it was one pair, then another, then more. Applause filled the waiting area, unexpected and unrestrained. The boy clapped furiously, laughing out loud. The woman with silver hair joined in, nodding with approval. Even the businessman, who had looked so impatient before, clapped politely before picking up his suitcase again. The girl's throat tightened as heat rushed to her cheeks. She wasn't used to this, to being noticed, to being celebrated. For so long, her songs had existed only in her notebook or in the safety of her room. Now they were out here, in the open, and people were actually clapping for her. She glanced at the man with the guitar again, almost searching for confirmation that this was real. He gave a small shrug, as if to say, "See? They heard you." That simple gesture loosened something inside her, something that had been wound tight for years. She let out a laugh, short and breathless, not because anything was funny, but because relief felt so overwhelming. The applause faded into scattered murmurs. People returned to their seats, picked up their bags, checked the overhead boards. Life moved on, but it wasn't the same as before. The girl could feel it. Something had shifted, not just in the station, but in her. She had come here expecting to be invisible, to risk failure and maybe walk away in shame. Instead, she had been seen. And more than that, she had been heard. Her gaze met the guitarist's again, and for the first time she spoke. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice raw but steady. He nodded once, not asking for more. It was enough. The distant roar of a train approaching filled the air. Announcements crackled overhead, pulling everyone back into the routine of travel. People gathered their things, forming lines along the platform. The world was moving forward as it always did, but she remained still for just a moment longer, holding on to what had happened. Her fingers brushed the edge of her notebook. She knew she would write about this later. The missed notes, the trembling hands, the stranger who had pulled a song out of her when she thought she was about to lose it. But no matter how she described it, words on a page would never fully capture what it had felt like to live it. The guitar was back in its case now, the man standing tall with it slung across his back. He didn't look like someone who needed thanks or recognition. He simply looked content, as though playing alongside her had been enough for him too. The girl took a deep breath, the kind that feels like a new beginning, and let her shoulders relax. She wasn't sure what came next, but she knew one thing for certain. She would never forget the sound of that applause, or the way a stranger's music had carried her through the moment she thought she couldn't survive. The train doors opened, people shuffled forward, and the station began to empty. But even as the noise returned, she carried something quiet and powerful with her. Proof that her voice, once hidden, had finally found a place to belong, even if only for a few minutes. The doors of the train slid open with their usual hiss, and people began moving quickly, as if the spell of the music had never happened. The crowd reformed into its familiar rush, suitcases bumping, announcements echoing, footsteps clattering against the tiles. Life at the station went back to what it always was: hurried, distracted, ordinary. But for her, nothing felt ordinary anymore. She clutched her notebook tightly to her chest, as if it were a treasure she had almost lost. Her hands were no longer trembling. Her heart was still racing, but in a different way. Less fear, more exhilaration. She had sung. She had stayed. And people had listened. The man with the guitar slung the strap over his shoulder and gave her a final glance. There was no expectation in his eyes, no demand for thanks, no attempt to prolong the moment. Just quiet recognition. Two strangers who had shared a song without ever exchanging names. She opened her mouth, searching for something to say, something more than just thank you. But nothing seemed right. Words felt too small for what had just happened. So instead, she smiled. Small, but real. He nodded once in return, and that was enough. The train conductor called out, urging passengers to board. She hesitated, her feet heavy against the floor. Part of her wanted to stay, to keep singing, to see if the music could keep the crowd together just a little longer. But she knew the moment had already ended. Its beauty was in how fleeting it was. She stepped onto the train, her notebook still pressed against her chest. As she found a seat by the window, she glanced back one last time. The man was still there, standing with his guitar case. For a second, she thought he might board too. Instead, he turned, walking slowly down the platform, his figure fading into the crowd. The train lurched forward. She leaned her forehead against the cool glass, replaying the entire night in her mind. The missed note, the fear, the soft nod that invited her to keep going, and the way his guitar had steadied her voice. Every piece of it felt like it had been meant to happen exactly as it did. She didn't know if she would ever see him again. Maybe he was just passing through, like everyone else at the station. But she knew this much. She would never forget him. And she would never forget how it felt to be heard, truly heard, for the first time. Her lips curved into a quiet smile as the city lights blurred past the window. She whispered the last line of the song under her breath. This time not for practice, not for courage, but because she wanted to. The words sounded different now, stronger, freer, her own. The train carried her forward, But part of her stayed behind on that wooden bench, in that echoing station, where a girl who had once been afraid to sing had discovered that her voice could reach farther than she ever believed. And though the crowd would forget by morning, she knew she never would. Because sometimes the most ordinary places become stages, and sometimes the most ordinary nights hold the kind of magic that changes you forever. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy meaningful stories like this, we'd love to have you as a subscriber.